passes it in as the first parameter, which is used as self. And so self.x, which is what we're doing in this line right here, self.x is a variable. X starts out as 0. X starts out as 0 because when it was constructed it was set to 0. So we're in here, an is an alias of self, and now it looks up self.x, which is 0, adds 1 to it, and so this becomes 1. And then we print so far 1. And then the code returns and it goes down and does it again. And x becomes 2, prints out so far 2, comes back down, and does the last time, calls it again, self.x is 2, add 1 to it and stick it back in, so this becomes 3, and we print out 3. And then the program finishes. And so you can think of this as constructing the object and then associating it with this an variable. Now that we've created this object, we can play around with things we've played around before with dir and type. We use dir and type to kind of inspect variables and types and objects. So we've been using objects all along. This code here says, hey, make me an empty list. Well, it turns out that what we're saying is there is already a list class inside of Python, and we're constructing an empty list, and when we get back this empty list, we're assigning that into X. So X, in a sense, contains or points to an empty list. So then we say, hey, what is in X? What kind of thing is X? Well, it's a list. This is a thing. It's a list type. Lists have list of things in them. And, use append and all the things we've been doing before, they're just objects. And then the dir, if you remember the dir is the capabilities. And there's all these internal capabilities that do things like implement the bracket operator, etc. Those double underscore ones, we can ignore them, although you can even look them up and figure out what they mean if you feel like it. But the methods that we tend to call are in this class. And so things like x.sort, I've always told you that is the sort method within the X thing, and the dot operator is the operator that we use to look something up within an object. And so you've been using this syntax all along. X.sort, dictionary.items, all of those are methods within the corresponding class. If we take a look at this line of code that we've been doing for a very long time, which says, oh, stick hello there into Y. If I reword that as more OO or object-oriented, what this single quote does says, make me a string object and put some text in it, and then when that is done being constructed, stick that into Y, right? And so Y now points to a string object that's been pre-initialized to the string hello there. Now that's a long way of saying hello there ends up in Y, but in OO terms we can talk about that. If we do a dir of that, we see a whole bunch of internal methods which have double underscores, and then we see all kinds of methods that we've been using. We've been using methods like upper, we've been using methods like find, we've been using methods like rstrip, right? We've been using these methods, so we go to like y.rstrip, parenthesis. Again, that's a method, that's an object, not a class, it's an object, and that is the object lookup operator. Now if we do the same thing to code that we've built, or a class that we've built, so now we have a party animal class. Remember, this up to here is just definition. Now we construct it and we store it in an. So an is a variable that contains an object of type party animal. We ask it what type it is, and it prints out here. It says this is a class, and it's main underscore party animal, and this whole thing here is the underscore main. It's scoped to underscore main. But you can see that you have made a new type. You built a type by using this class keyword. And then we use the dir. Remember, dir looks for capabilities. And again, you will see a whole bunch of underscore things. They have meaning. You can look them up. But eventually, you'll see the two things that you've put in it. One is the method party, and the other is the attribute or field X. And again, these are the things that you can say an.x or an.party, because this dot is the object operator, the object lookup operator that says look up in the object an the thing X, or look up in the object an the thing party. Okay? So up next we'll talk a little bit about how objects are created and destroyed. We also call that object lifecycle. Now we're going to talk a little bit about object lifecycle. And what we mean by object lifecycle is the act of creating and destroying these objects. And I've been using this term constructor already. And so when we declare a variable, whether it's a string or a dictionary or a party animal, there we create them and then they're discarded, and there's all this dynamic memory that comes and goes. And we, as the writers of objects, have the ability to insert ourselves at the moment of object creation and at the moment of object destruction. And we make special functions that we call the constructor, the object constructor, or the class constructor, and the destructor. And we don't actually explicitly call them; they're called automatically by Python on our behalf. And so the constructor is what's more commonly used. It's used to set up any initial values of variables if necessary, et cetera, et cetera. Destructors are, we'll cover them, but they're used very rarely. So here's a bit of code that we've got. It's our party animal, and a lot of it is the same as what we've been doing so far. So we have this variable x, and the constructor has a special name, underscore, underscore, init, underscore. Again, we pass in the instance of the object, self. And in this one, all we're going to do is print out that you're constructed. And here's this code that we've had before. And now we have underscore, underscore, del, and then we pass in self. And we'll just print out that we're being destructed and what the current value of x is for that particular instance. So let's go ahead and run this. And so again, this doesn't really do any code up to here. That just defines party animal, but this is the constructing of it. And basically that says, oh, and it really kind of creates these variables, and then it also runs the constructor. And so in this case, this line right here is causing the I am constructed message to come out. Then we do and party, and that says, 1 and 2. And here's an interesting thing. We're actually going to destroy this variable by throwing away an no longer points at that object. An is going to point to 42. So we're going to sort of overwrite an and put 42 in it. And at that point, Python's like, oh, this whole little object that I just created, somewhere it's out here, it's vaporizing it and throwing it away. And so before this line completes, it actually calls our destructor on our behalf. And so that message comes out. So we are allowed, as the builder of these objects, to add these little chunks of code that says, I want to be involved at the moment this object is created, and I want to be involved at the moment that this object is destroyed. Now, in this last line, an is no longer a party animal. An is now an integer. It's got a 42 in it. It's gone. It's been created, it was used, and then it was destroyed. Okay? So you got to be careful. If you overwrite something, you can sort of throw the object away. So the constructor is a special block of code that's called when the object is created to set the object up. So we can create lots of instances. Everything we've done so far is we make a class and then we create one instance, one object. And each of these objects ends up being stored in its own variable. We have a variable an and we've been using it. But the more interesting thing begins to happen when we have multiple instances of the same class sitting in different variables. And it has its own copy of the instance variables. So let's take a look at this. So this code here, I've taken out the destructor, and it shows a little bit more information. So now we're going to put two variables in here. We're going to have a current score or whatever and a name, and we're going to start it out as blank. And this time we're going to add a parameter onto the constructor. And so the self comes in sort of automatically as the object is being constructed. But if we put a parameter on the constructor call, which is this party animal call, then this comes in as the z variable. And so self is the object itself, and z, this first parameter, is whatever parameter we put here. Everything we've done so far has no parameter here, but now we have a parameter here. And then that means that when we call this constructor, this line of code comes, and then name is no longer blank. Name is going to be Sally in this particular thing. And then I'll say, oh, self.name, which will be Sally, has been constructed. And so then we have this, and that object is now constructed, and then we put it in the variable s. And then we call the party method on that, and we construct a different one. And so this time it calls, and z is Jim, and we basically have another copy of this. And so this is how it's going to look.